The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the Blackwood mansion's dining room, where silence fell like a blade. Celeste Blackwood sat frozen at the mahogany table, her husband Marcus's words still echoing in her mind. "Perhaps we should discuss portion control, darling. The cameras will be unforgiving at next week's gala." Around the table, the usual suspects of her torments smirked behind their wine glasses. Victoria Blackwood, her mother-in-law, pursed her lips in that familiar expression of disapproval. Priscilla, Marcus's razor-thin sister, barely contained her laughter. The monthly family dinner had become a gladiatorial arena where Celeste was always the sacrifice. "Marcus, really," Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm sure Celeste is doing her best. Oh, I must say, that dress does seem rather ... snug." Celeste's fingers tightened around her water glass. The navy blue dress had fit perfectly last month, but stress eating had taken its toll. She'd been a size 12 when Marcus married her 3 years ago, drawn to what he'd called her artistic sensuality. Now, at a size 16, she was his greatest embarrassment. "Mother's right, of course," Priscilla added, spearing a piece of salmon with surgical precision. "The tech industry is so image-conscious. When Marcus announces the Nexus merger next week, all eyes will be on you, Celeste. You represent the Blackwood brand now." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his handsome face arranged in an expression of patient suffering. At 35, he was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, his company Technova poised to dominate the market. His auburn hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. He was everything Celeste had once thought she wanted in a husband. "I've arranged for you to see Dr. Whitmore," Marcus announced, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. "He's the best cosmetic surgeon in the city. A little nip and tuck, maybe some liposuction. We can have you camera ready by the gala." The words hit Celeste like physical blows. Around the table, the conversation continued as if they were discussing renovating a bathroom rather than reconstructing her body. She looked down at her untouched plate, fighting back tears that would only give them more ammunition. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Victoria said, raising her glass. "To transformation." "To transformation," the others echoed, their glasses clinking in a toast that excluded her entirely. Celeste excused herself from the table, her legs unsteady as she walked through the mansion's cold corridors. She found refuge in her art studio, a converted sunroom that Marcus had reluctantly allowed her to keep. Surrounded by her paintings and sketches, she finally allowed herself to cry. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window, a woman she barely recognized. Her chestnut hair had lost its shine. Her green eyes were dull with defeat. The vibrant art teacher who had once commanded classrooms full of inspired students had been slowly erased, replaced by this hollow version of herself. She picked up a paintbrush, her hand trembling as she approached the canvas. But instead of painting, she found herself staring at her wedding photo on the easel. Marcus's smile was triumphant, possessive. Her own smile looked hopeful, naive. She'd thought she was marrying her prince. Instead, she'd entered a beautifully decorated prison. The sound of Marcus's laughter drifted from the dining room, probably sharing another joke at her expense. Something crystallized in her chest, not the familiar ache of humiliation, but something harder, colder. She'd spent 3 years shrinking herself, trying to become the woman they wanted her to be. She'd apologized for taking up space, for eating, for existing, no more. Celeste wiped her tears and moved to her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She searched for personal trainers, divorce attorneys, private investigators. If they wanted a transformation, she'd give them one. But it wouldn't be the kind they expected. She thought about the gala, where Marcus would announce the merger that would make him one of the most powerful men in tech. It would be his moment of triumph, his coronation. But empires built on cruelty had a way of crumbling. As she researched, planned, and plotted, Celeste felt something she hadn't experienced in years: power. They'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating her, of assuming that kindness meant weakness. They'd forgotten that she had once been a woman who commanded respect, who had dreams and ambitions of her own. The woman in the gilded cage was about to break free, and when she did, the last laugh would be hers. The underground gym smelled of sweat and determination, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the Blackwood mansion. Celeste stood in the doorway, her heart racing as she surveyed the dimly lit space filled with heavy bags and weathered equipment. She'd chosen this place deliberately, somewhere Marcus and his circle would never venture. "You must be Celeste." The voice was deep, warm, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. She turned to find a man approaching, and her breath caught. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. His simple black t-shirt revealed arms corded with muscle, and there was something almost predatory in the way he moved. "James Fletcher," he said, extending his hand. When their fingers touched, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. "I understand you're looking for a transformation." "Something like that," she managed, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. He circled her slowly, his gaze professional but oddly intimate. "Tell me what you really want, Celeste. Not what someone else told you to want." The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? "I want to feel strong," she said finally. "I want to feel like myself again." A slow smile spread across his face. "Good, that's a start." The first session was brutal. James pushed her past every limit she thought she had, his hands guiding her form, his voice alternately encouraging and demanding. When she collapsed, gasping, he was there with water and a towel, his touch lingering just long enough to make her skin tingle. "You're stronger than you know," he said, his eyes holding hers. "But you've forgotten how to fight." Over the following weeks, their sessions became the highlight of her existence. James taught her to throw punches that could shatter bone, to move with fluid grace, to breathe through pain. But more than that, he taught her to reclaim her power. "Your husband," he said one evening as they worked the heavy bag, "he's trying to make you disappear." Celeste paused, her wrapped hands still pressed against the leather. "How do you know about Marcus?" "I know men like him." James's voice was hard. "Men who think they can own beauty, control it, diminish it when it threatens them." She turned to face him and found him closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "And what would you do with beauty, James?" His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I'd worship it," he said quietly. "I'd help it remember its own power." The tension between them crackled like electricity, but James stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "That's enough for tonight. But Celeste?" She looked back at him from the doorway. "Whatever you're planning, I want to help." The next morning, she sat across from Natasha Pierce in a sleek downtown office. The divorce attorney was everything Marcus would hate: sharp, successful, and absolutely ruthless. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing. "Mrs. Blackwood," Natasha said, reviewing the file spread before her, "your husband is worth approximately $200 million. In a standard divorce, you might expect 30 to 40 million. But you're not here for a standard divorce, are you?" Celeste straightened her shoulders, channeling the confidence James had been building in her. "I want to destroy him, completely." Natasha smiled a predator, recognizing a kindred spirit. "Now that's interesting. Tell me about his business." "Technova is built on government contracts and corporate partnerships. His reputation is everything. If that reputation were to be DAMGED, the house of cards falls down, Natasha finished. I like your thinking, but we'll need evidence. Real evidence. That evening, Celeste found herself back at the gym, but this time James was waiting with champagne and takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. He'd transformed the space with candles and soft lighting, creating an intimate sanctuary in the midst of the urban decay. What's this? She asked, touched by the gesture. A celebration. You took the first step today. He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers. To new beginnings. As they ate, she told him about her meeting with Natasha, about the plan beginning to take shape. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. You're changing, he said finally. Not just your body, your whole presence. Is that good or bad? Instead of answering, he stood and moved to the sound system, selecting something slow and sultry. Dance with me. She started to protest. She hadn't danced in years, not since Marcus had made cruel comments about her rhythm. But James was already pulling her to her feet, his hands settling on her waist with reverent care. They moved together in the candlelit space, and Celeste felt something awakening inside her. Not just desire, though that was certainly present, but something deeper. The woman she used to be was stirring, stretching, remembering what it felt like to be wanted for who she was, rather than who she might become. James, she whispered, looking up into his eyes. I know, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I feel it too. He spun her gently, and when she came back to him, they were closer than before. His hand tangled in her hair, and she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. A kiss, when it came, was inevitable soft at first, then deeper, hungrier. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. Whatever happens with your husband, whatever you need to do, I'm with you. All the way. Standing there in his arms, surrounded by the evidence of her growing strength, Celeste felt truly alive for the first time in years. Marcus had tried to cage her, to make her small and forgettable. But he'd created his own worst nightmare instead, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The real transformation was just beginning. The rain hammered against the windows of the small cafe where Celeste sat, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Oliver Chun fidgeted with his napkin, his nervous energy palpable even in the crowded space. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the pallor of someone who'd spent too many nights losing sleep over his conscience. I shouldn't be here, he said for the third time, glancing toward the door. If Marcus finds out. He won't, Celeste said, her voice carrying the authority James had helped her cultivate. Because he doesn't see people like us as threats. We're invisible to him. Oliver had been Marcus's head of software development until 6 months ago, when he'd been quietly pushed out after raising concerns about the company's practices. Natasha had found him through her network of corporate whistleblowers, and one look at his file had told Celeste everything she needed to know. Oliver Chun was a man with a grudge and the technical skills to make it count. What Marcus is planning. With the Nexus merger, Oliver said, his voice dropping to a whisper, it's going to devastate thousands of families. The moment the deal closes, he's planning mass layoffs, 60% of both companies' workforce. But he's already negotiated golden parachutes for himself and his inner circle. Celeste felt a familiar surge of anger. It was so perfectly. Marcus concerned only with his own gain, viewing human beings as expendable resources. You have proof? Oliver slid a flash drive across the table. Internal memos, financial projections, recorded video conferences. Everything you need to show the world who Marcus Blackwood really is. She palmed the drive, her heart racing. "What do you want in return?" "Justice," he said simply. "And maybe a chance to make things right." That evening, Celeste found herself in James's apartment for the first time. It was a converted warehouse space, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures, but he'd made it warm with carefully chosen furniture and original artwork. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights while he prepared dinner. "You got it," he said, reading her expression as he handed her a glass of wine. It wasn't a question. Oliver came through. "We have everything we need to expose Marcus's plans." She accepted the wine, allowing herself a moment to savor this small victory. "Natasha thinks we can use it to force a favorable settlement, but ... But that's not what you want," James finished, moving to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, and she leaned back into his solid warmth. "I want him to feel what I felt," she said quietly. "The humiliation, the helplessness, the moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself crumbles." James's hands moved to her waist, and she could feel the tension in his body. "And after? What happens to us after you've had your revenge?" She turned in his arms, studying his face. They'd been dancing around this question for weeks, their relationship existing in a strange limbo between professional alliance and something deeper. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm not sure I know who I am without the anger driving me." "I know who you are," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the woman who walks into that gym every day and refuses to quit. You're the woman who's planning to take down a tech giant with nothing but intelligence and determination. You're the woman who makes me want to be better than I am." The kiss that followed was different from their first, hungrier, more desperate. She could taste the wine on his lips, feel the barely leashed power in his hands as they tangled in her hair. When he lifted her, her legs wrapped around his waist instinctively, and she marveled at the strength she'd built, at the way her body responded to his with perfect synchronization. He carried her to his bedroom, laying her down on the bed with reverent care. In the dim light, she could see the desire in his eyes, but also something deeper. Love, perhaps, or the promise of it. "Are you sure?" he asked, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Instead of answering, she pulled him down to her, losing herself in the heat of his mouth, the weight of his body against hers. For the first time in years, she felt beautiful, desired, worthy of worship rather than criticism. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, James traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice carefully neutral. She tensed, preparing for disappointment. "What?" "I used to work for Marcus. 5 years ago, before I became a trainer, I was head of security at Technova." Celeste sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "What happened?" "I found out about some of his ... activities. The corporate espionage, the blackmail, the way he destroyed competitors. When I threatened to expose him, he buried me, destroyed my reputation, made sure I'd never work in tech again." James's jaw tightened. "I've been waiting for someone like you, Celeste. Someone with the access and the motivation to take him down." She should have been angry, should have felt used. Instead, she felt a strange sense of completion. "So we're both out for revenge. We're both out for justice," he corrected. "There's a difference." The next morning, she stood in the bathroom of the Blackwood mansion, studying her reflection, as she prepared for another day of playing the dutiful wife. The woman looking back at her was transformed, her body leaner and stronger, her posture confident, her eyes bright with purpose. Marcus still saw what he expected to see, but that blindness would be his downfall. At breakfast, she played her role perfectly. When Marcus made his usual disparaging comments about her appearance, she nodded submissively while mentally reviewing the evidence that would destroy him. When Priscilla mocked her charity work, she smiled sweetly while planning how to use the gala as the stage for his public humiliation. The merger announcement is in 3 days, Marcus said, scrolling through his phone. I trust you'll be ready to play your part? Of course, darling, Celeste replied, buttering her toast with deliberate care. I've been preparing for this moment my whole life. He looked up, perhaps sensing something different in her tone, but she was already back to her performance of meek compliance. She could feel the weight of Oliver's flash drive in her purse, the memory of James's hands on her skin, the promise of Natasha's legal expertise. Marcus Blackwood had no idea that his perfect world was about to shatter, and the woman he'd tried so hard to destroy would be the one holding the hammer. The endgame was approaching, and Celeste had never felt more alive. The night before the gala, Celeste moved through the Blackwood mansion like a ghost with deadly purpose. Marcus was in his study, celebrating the impending merger with expensive scotch and phone calls to his associates. Tomorrow, he would stand before the tech industry's elite and announce the deal that would make him one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley. He had no idea it would be his last night as a free man. She found him exactly where she expected, behind his mahogany desk, tie loosened, looking every inch the conquering hero. The hidden camera she'd installed weeks ago was perfectly positioned, and the audio recorder James had given her was tucked discreetly in her jewelry. Darling, she said, stepping into the room in a silk robe that clung to her newly sculpted curves. You've been working so hard. I thought you might need some relaxation. Marcus looked up, his eyes immediately cataloging the changes in her appearance. The months of training with James had transformed her body into something that commanded attention, lean, strong, sensual. But Marcus, in his arrogance, saw only validation of his own influence. Well, well, he said, rising from his chair. Look what a little motivation can accomplish. She moved closer, letting the robe slip slightly off her shoulder. I wanted to thank you for pushing me to become the woman I was meant to be. He laughed, the sound sharp and self-satisfied. I told you all it would take was discipline. You just needed the right incentive. Tell me about tomorrow, she said, settling onto the edge of his desk. Tell me about your triumph. Marcus's ego was a massive, hungry thing, and her a parent. Submission fed it perfectly. He poured himself another scotch and began to boast, his voice growing louder and more careless with each sip. The Nexus merger will make us the dominant force in artificial intelligence, he said, his words slightly slurred. Those idiots at Nexus have no idea what's coming. The moment the contracts are signed, we'll gut their workforce and absorb their technology. 60,000 jobs gone overnight. Celeste leaned forward, letting her robe fall open just enough to keep his attention. 60,000? That seems substantial. Substantial profits, he corrected, his hand moving to her thigh. I'll make more in the first quarter than most people see in a lifetime. And the best part? It's all perfectly legal. The employment contracts have a clause that allows for restructuring in the event of a merger. They signed their own death warrants. She could feel the recorder capturing every word, every callous laugh. You're brilliant, Marcus. But what about the government contracts? Won't they investigate? That's the beauty of it, he said, pulling her closer. I have Senator Williams in my pocket. His campaign fund has been very grateful for Technova's contributions. He'll make sure any investigations disappear. There it was, the confession that would destroy him. Bribery, conspiracy, the casual destruction of thousands of lives. She forced herself to smile, to play the adoring wife one last time. I love it when you're powerful, she whispered against his ear. It makes me feel safe. Marcus's hands were on her now, clumsy with drink and triumph. She endured his touch, thinking of James, of the life waiting for her after tomorrow night. When Marcus finally passed out, she slipped away to her own room, the evidence secured. But sleep eluded her. She found herself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the moment when Marcus would realize what she'd done. Would he remember this night? Would he understand that his own arrogance had been his undoing? At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and drove to James's apartment. He was waiting for her, as if he'd known she would come. She fell into his arms without a word, and he held her while she shook with reaction. "It's done," she whispered. "I have everything we need. How do you feel?" He asked, his voice gentle. "Empty," she admitted. "Like I've been holding my breath for so long, I've forgotten how to breathe." James tilted her face up to his eyes reflecting the city lights streaming through the windows. "After tomorrow, you'll remember. After tomorrow, you'll be free." They made love with desperate intensity, as if they were trying to create something pure to balance the darkness of what was coming. His hands worshipped her body with reverent care, and she lost herself in the sensation of being truly seen, truly valued. "I love you," she said as they lay entwined afterward, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I love you too," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever happens tomorrow, that won't change." And next evening, as she prepared for the gala, Celeste felt a strange calm settle over her. The dress she'd chosen was a masterpiece deep burgundy silk that hugged her curves like liquid fire. It was the antithesis of everything Marcus had tried to make her wear, bold and beautiful and impossible to ignore. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, and the diamonds at her throat caught the light with each breath. She looked powerful, dangerous, magnificent. The woman who had cowered at family dinners was gone, replaced by someone who could destroy empires with a smile. Marcus appeared in the doorway of her dressing room, resplendent in his tuxedo, ready to make history. "Darling?" "More than ready," she replied, her smile sharp as a blade. As they walked into the ballroom, Celeste felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. She heard the whispers, saw the shock and admiration in the faces of people who had written her off as Marcus's dowdy wife. Victoria and Priscilla stood near, the champagne fountain, their expressions frozen in disbelief. "My God," she heard someone whisper. "Is that really Celeste Blackwood?" Marcus basked in the attention, his hand possessive on her waist. He thought they were admiring his handiwork, his successful molding of his wife into something worthy of his status. He had no idea they were looking at a woman who had forged herself into a weapon. The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. Celeste played her part perfectly, the transformed wife supporting her husband's moment of triumph. She smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right jokes, and all the while, she felt the weight of Oliver's flash drive in her purse and the memory of Marcus's recorded confessions. When the time came for his speech, Marcus took the stage, with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He spoke of innovation, of progress, of the bright future Technova would build. The audience hung on his every word, mesmerized by his charisma and success. Celeste watched from the wings, her heart steady as a metronome. In 5 minutes, she would walk onto that stage and bring his world crashing down. In 5 minutes, she would have her revenge. The last laugh was finally within reach. Marcus's voice filled the ballroom as he reached the crescendo of his speech, his words painting a picture of technological revolution and unprecedented prosperity. The audience was captivated, their faces turned toward him like flowers following. The sun, he was in his element, the master of his universe, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with triumph, "I present to you the future of artificial intelligence, the Technov-Nexus merger." The applause was thunderous. Champagne glasses raised in salute. Camera flashes illuminated Marcus's face as he soaked in the adulation. This was his moment of absolute victory, the culmination of years of ruthless ambition. Celeste stepped onto the stage. Her burgundy dress caught the spotlights like liquid fire, and a hush fell over the crowd. Even in his moment of triumph, Marcus couldn't help but turn toward her, his expression shifting from surprise to pleasure. In his arrogance, he thought she was there to share his glory. "My wife, everyone," he said, reaching out to her. "The woman who has stood by me through everything." She took his hand, her smile radiant and terrible. "Thank you, darling. You're absolutely right. I have stood by you through everything. Which is why I'm uniquely qualified to tell everyone here exactly who you really are." Marcus's smile faltered. "Celeste, what are you?" 3 years ago, I thought I was marrying a brilliant businessman," she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I thought I was marrying a man of integrity. Instead, I married a sociopath who views human beings as expendable resources." The crowd began to murmur, confusion rippling through the ballroom. Marcus tried to move toward the microphone, but Celeste was already there, her presence commanding the stage. "Marcus told you about the merger," she said, her voice gaining strength. "What he didn't tell you is that the moment those contracts are signed, 60,000 people will lose their jobs. 60,000 families will be destroyed so that he can add another zero to his net worth." "That's enough," Marcus hissed, lunging for the microphone, but Celeste was ready for him. Months of training with James had taught her to anticipate, to react, to fight. She sidestepped his grab with fluid grace, her hand already reaching for the flash drive in her purse. "I have proof," she announced, holding up the drive. "Internal memos, financial projections, recorded conversations. Everything you need to see the monster hiding behind the humanitarian facade." The screens around the ballroom flickered to life, displaying the documents Oliver had provided. The crowd gasped as they saw the cold calculations, the callous dismissal of human cost, the detailed plans for mass layoffs disguised as operational efficiency. Marcus's face had gone white. "You can't do this. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. You'll be in breach of contract." Celeste laughed, the sound sharp and bright. "The NDA you had me sign covers Technova's trade secrets. It doesn't cover criminal activity. And yes, Marcus, what you've done is criminal." She pressed a button on her phone, and Marcus's own voice filled the ballroom, his drunken confessions from the night before, his boasts about bribing Senator Williams, his casual dismissal of the lives he would destroy. The crowd erupted. Investors stood in shock, their faces pale as they realized the implications. Board members huddled in urgent conversation. The press, sensing blood in the water, surged forward with cameras and microphones. "You bitch," Marcus snarled, all pretense of civility abandoned. "You have no idea what you've just done." "I know exactly what I've done," Celeste replied, her voice steady as steel. "I've exposed you for what you are. And I've filed for divorce. The papers are being served to your lawyers as we speak." From the crowd, she saw Natasha Pierce nod approvingly. The divorce attorney had timed everything perfectly, using the public revelation to maximize the impact of the legal proceedings. Marcus made one last desperate grab for control. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled wife trying to destroy me out of spite." "Am I?" Celeste asked, her smile sharp as a blade. She gestured to the screens, still displaying his crimes. "Are the FBI agents currently raiding your offices also acting out of spite? Are the SEC investigators freezing your assets also lying?" The color drained from Marcus's face completely. Around the ballroom, his associates were already distancing themselves, their loyalty evaporating like morning mist. Victoria and Priscilla stood frozen by the champagne fountain, their faces masks of horror as they watched their golden boys empire crumble. The merger is dead, Celeste continued, addressing the crowd. The Nexus board voted to withdraw their offer the moment they saw the evidence. Your stock price has already fallen 40%, and it's still dropping. She turned back to Marcus, her voice soft but audible through the microphone. You asked me once what people see when they look at me. Tonight, they'll see a woman who fought back. Tomorrow, they'll see a woman who survived. But you, Marcus? You'll see the inside of a prison cell. The FBI agents were already moving through the crowd, their badges glinting in the ballroom lights. Marcus looked around desperately, seeking escape, but there was nowhere to run. The empire he'd built on lies and cruelty was collapsing around him. As the agents approached, Marcus looked at Celeste with pure hatred. You think you've won? You think this is over? I think, she said, stepping closer, that you're about to learn what it feels like to lose everything. How does it feel, Marcus? To know that your entire world is crumbling? To know that everyone you thought you could trust is walking away? The agents were beside him now, their handcuffs glinting. As they read him his rights, Marcus's eyes never left Celeste's face. She watched impassively as they led him away, feeling nothing but a strange sense of completion. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, investors fled, and the cream of Silicon Valley society found themselves witnesses to the most spectacular corporate downfall in recent memory. James appeared at her side, his hand warm and steady on her back. Are you okay? I'm perfect, she said, and meant it. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. 6 months later, Celeste stood in the sunlit space that would become the Aurora Center for Survivors, her art therapy studio taking shape around her. The settlement from the divorce had been substantial. Natasha had been as ruthless as promised, but more importantly, she was free. Marcus had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for bribery, conspiracy, and securities fraud. Victoria and Priscilla had lost their social standing along with their trust funds, their names now synonymous with scandal. The Blackwood Empire was no more. The first group starts next week, James said, appearing behind her with coffee and the satisfied smile of a man who had helped architect the perfect revenge. Nervous? He asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Excited, she corrected, leaning back against his chest. I finally know who I am again. Through the window, she could see the city where she'd once been a prisoner in a gilded cage. Now it was the place where she'd built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. The woman who had cowered at family dinners was gone, replaced by someone who could help other survivors find their own strength. Marcus had tried to destroy her, to make her small and forgettable. Instead, he'd forged her into something unbreakable. And in the end, the last laugh had been hers after all. The phone rang, another survivor seeking help, another chance to turn pain into power. Celeste smiled as she answered, ready to help someone else discover that even in the darkest cage, there was always a way to break free. The revolution continued, one woman at a time.